Hello and welcome. Today we are going to talk about writing for horror comics and maybe a little bit about the art, because when it comes to writing comics, you're always going to be leaning on the art, and when you are writing comics, you are always directing the art. It is integral to it. You cannot write comics without thinking about the visuals, and the visual element of horror is very important. Okay, so that's that. When it comes to horror, I think my number one tip is to not focus on scary. I think we over fixate on the idea of making horror horrific. When horror is a lot more broad of a category, there's tons of subgenres to horror, and they all kind of focus on different negative emotions. You know, there's psychological horror that can fixate on all sorts of manners of the psyche. You know, you've got existential dread, you've got gore, we've got discomfort, disgust, unsettling, and just all sorts of feelings that kind of just are uncomfortable, or unsettling. I think unsettling is definitely the word. Most things that I read in terms of horror are not scary, but they leave me feeling ooh, I don't know about that, you know? So when it comes to writing horror, you need to fixate less on being okay, how can I scare people? And more about telling a story that has unsettling elements in it, has scary elements in it. I actually have a few comics that I write that are horror. I have Pretty Mouth, which was the second comic I ever made. And then I have The Magpie, which is a prequel to that. And they are both eldritch horror. I have a little focus on gore in them. There's a little bit of psychological elements to it. That's kind of a personal favorite thing of mine. I love how metaphorical horror can get, and it can be a way to create visual manifestations of uncomfortable feelings. The Magpie, I fixate a lot on feelings of loneliness and despair and kind of death in general, and then I bring elements into the story that kind of reflect that. A lot of what making horror is in terms of visual is, I find quiet, silence is very important. I think that there are some types of comics where you can get away with lots and lots of talking, but I think that horror is one of those much more visceral, much more palpable sort of story types where the visuals of comics can really speak for themselves. Using detail, creating intimacy. I find horror is a very intimate genre. It's kind of like erotica, but negative. And similarly to erotica, a lot of it is portrayed visually. There's setup and story that is done through dialogue and through character interaction, and you can have a whole story built around it. Not every scene that you write in either romance or horror is going to be baked in the genre tropes, but you need those kind of foundationally. You can make a short story or a one-off horror thing where just it's a quick little story about a monster, or a quick little story that's full of existential dread. Or you can similarly do that with erotica, with romance. You can do a quick one-off and have a great time, and it works really well. Whereas if you want to extend it long term, you can't fixate wholly on those things. You can't really make a sandwich entirely out of bread. You know, you need all the different fixins inside them, as opposed to little short stories, which is just a little bit of toast. You toast and you eat it and you're good, you know, a little dry toast. I hope that's making sense at all. I'm sorry for that. But yeah, generally speaking, when you are actually writing those impactful horror scenes, you want to focus on visual and you want to focus on detail, detail is just very scary and unsettling for some reason. Whereas like when you think about it, like simplified art is a lot more cute, a lot more comfortable, whereas detail is where you're going to find a lot of the discomfort. Lock into the things that you are afraid of, the things that make you uncomfortable. Drawing from that, creating visuals from that, is where you can kind of find your scary, you know, find what is uncomfortable. Pull from metaphor, try to create visual representations that are physical and fleshy and gross and bring them to the page. And make sure to read lots of horror and draw from that. There are tropes that work for good reasons. And you know, whatever scares you. Whatever leaves you unsettled is what leaves you unsettled, and you shouldn't feel like bad about that. You just kind of got to pull from that. With the magpie, a lot of it was for developing like the big shadowy monster. Like there was the actual kind of feelings of loneliness, depression, just despair that brought forth like the magpie for me. But it also came from like walking around a hoarder house and feeling very uncomfortable with that, like as a kid, and also like having like negative like creepy dreams as a kid about like shadowy monsters in the forest, and then wanting to create that in my comic, turning that into a comic form is where I found the scary and how I developed it out. I think all horror can be a bit silly sometimes. One man's like scary is another person's silly, and I think that's okay. What you find scary isn't going to be scary to everyone. I'm a huge fan of Junji Ito, but there are some of his short stories I just find a little bit silly. I'm not that scared by them, but I know other people find them terrifying. You know, like some of them are just a little bit silly, and that's fine. That's kind of the gambit with horror, right? I think on a more marketing scale, horror is a very difficult genre. It has a very dedicated fandom. When I write horror stories, I tend to get very dedicated fans. I do have difficulty at times with putting it on websites, being careful about like age restrictions, and obviously like age restrictions are a good thing. Like you don't want kids finding your work if you're doing super scary horror. And a lot of the times I get a little desensitized to what horror is, and I tend to add a lot of horror elements to my non-horror stories. So that is one aspect of it as well. But you do need to be careful about that. I use Comic Fury. Comic Fury is a great site for being certain that my horror stuff isn't going to be taken down. I also don't do a ton of over-the-top gore. A lot of that is because I do black and white for my horror. I think there is something to be said with black and white, allowing you to get away with things, but also allowing readers to like get what's going on. But yeah, like Magpie doesn't have tons of super horrific events. It's more of something that is built up slowly through like just weirdness, just general offness. Like that's something that's built up in like Silent Hill 2, isn't it? Where everything's just kind of like off and like uncanny, just even in the dialogue, even if you're ignoring like cool monster designs and stuff. Like that's an element of horror you can lean into. Like not everything you do visually and horrifically is going to be like something that you can get banned over, right? Like if you work within reason, like there are Junji Ito stories which probably would do well and fine to read on like a platform that's a little more restrictive, like is it the Slug Tongue Girl? Like that one's not like technically all that gory, but god, that's like really creepy. Whereas Tomy, like a lot of those ones might not do well. Those are the ones that might get like banned on a platform if you wanted to post them there. You just gotta kind of play it by ear. But basically what I'm saying is like just because you are posting horror doesn't mean it's going to get you a ban. You just got to play within your limits sometimes. And if you want to have a larger audience for it, like, you kind of have to tone things down and find other ways to make things scary. You know, one of the scariest things that I ever watched was that one episode of Pengu where the walrus eats the bed. Like, that horrifies me to this day. So, like, it is possible to find horror in places other than gore and bannable stuff. But I'm wandering off into the weeds. The point is that in general, even with all of this considered, horror has a very tight-knit fandom. I find it very cool. I like it. But there's definitely a ceiling to it. And that's all I want to say about writing horror comics today. Thank you so much for listening. If you have any questions about writing comics or anything of the sort, please leave one down below. And also, if you are looking to find more people that are into comics and talk with them and form community, you should check out my Discord. I need to promote it more. And yeah, it's where I hang out. It's down in the description below. Tons of people talk there and work on comic projects. And I hope you can find yourself some accountability there. And if not there, just leave something in the comments. I don't know. I'm just a guy. All right. I'll see you in the next one. All right. Goodbye.